Good afternoon. We're so excited to have you all back for another season of the Lunch Break, our webinar series. Whether this is your first time joining us or you're a returning guest, we're thrilled to have you here today. I want to start off real quick with some introductions. I'm Mike Muna, Director of Sales here. Joining me today is our fantastic host, Emma Finn. Emma is our Communications and Training Coordinator. We're also honored to have our CEO and founder of LunchAssist, Jen McNeil, as well as I want to give a big shout out to Catherine Carnetz, who's on the Zoom controls, and the rest of the LunchAssist team that's joining us on the call today as well. Speaking of our team, we are a passionate group of former state auditors, directors, and other school nutrition professionals. So we know firsthand, the challenges that you guys face, and we're really here to support you every step of the way. I want to take a quick second just to talk to you about some of our services if you don't already know. So we offer consulting services tailored specifically to California school districts. We also have nationwide memberships to LunchAssist Pro, which is our website. It's packed full of a bunch of tools such as like training videos for your staff, easy tracking for professional standards and reporting on that, as well as a rich resource library full of awesome resources developed by our staff here internally. If you're not currently a LunchAssist Pro member or a consulting customer and you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me via email at mike@lunchassist.org, or if you go to our website, there's also a place you can book a meeting on there with me as well. We also do offer some free resources as well, like our weekly newsletter and these webinar series. If you're not already subscribed, now's the perfect time. Our newsletter keeps you updated with upcoming webinars, industry news, and just valuable insights, so you don't want to miss out on that. Lastly, and most importantly, I want to take a moment to appreciate you, our amazing customers. You all are really what makes all of this possible. So we really, really appreciate it. Now let's go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to pass it over to Emma. Emma, go ahead and take it away for us.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everybody. It's really exciting to be back hosting this incredible webinar series. It's one of the juiciest resources I think we offer at LunchAssist, and it's truly become an important anchor within our community of school nutrition professionals. But before we get started, I'd like to go over the format for this webinar series. These webinars will be held on the first Thursday of every month at 2 p.m. Pacific time from February all the way through December 2025, with a little break in July. This webinar series is free and open to all. We're going to try and focus on things that are relevant across the US, but please note that we will likely mention a lot of California-specific items since that really is our expertise. Each webinar in this series will be broken into two parts. The first half will be dedicated to compliance, keeping everyone up to date and on track with key policy updates and a list of reminders for school nutrition programs in each month of the year. During the second half of each call, we'll take a deep dive into a specific school nutrition topic that is timely and relevant. So this month, our deep dive topic is the Buy American provision and updates to the school meal pattern requirements that are going into effect next school year. So we'll also touch on how this all relates to your procurement planning for the upcoming school year, but we'll get to that later. First, let's talk about what we need to be aware of as we kick off February in 2025. Jen, there has been a lot going on. January was a whirlwind. And with a new federal administration in the US, there's been a lot of buzz around executive orders, federal appointments, the budget reconciliation in Congress, and potential impacts on child nutrition programs. But what do people really need to know right now?
Yeah, good way to start us off, Emma. Thank you for kicking us off, and welcome everyone. It's so good to be here with you. We are just really honored to be able to make space for these important conversations in our community. And right now, I have to say, getting back together like this on these calls in this moment really reminds me of the work that we all did together during the pandemic. I see some beautiful, familiar faces, including Sally Sparrow. Hey, Sally, thanks for being here, who were with us all throughout COVID. And A lot of the fear and uncertainty and like whiplash of changes being thrown at us is very reminiscent of what we went through throughout 2020 and 2021. So I just want to acknowledge that and let you all know that, you know, we're here to support, and
Hi.
we are going to continue to make space for these conversations and be there to kind of help translate things as best we can. Um, this new federal administration has already been inundating us with executive orders, and there's proposals in Congress. I know many of us saw that proposed increases to CEP ISP and a requirement proposed to verify every single meal application, which would just be, you know, we'd have to hire armies of people to just verify applications. It would just really cut away at our program. Those are just proposed changes, but it's going to be more important than ever that we pay attention to these things and that we advocate for our programs, and also that we take care of one another and come together as a community, because it's already just been a few weeks and it feels like, you know, it feels like a lot. Beyond what's happening in our specific programs, of course, our communities are impacted, our parents, our families, our staff, our relatives, in many cases are being impacted by changes that are being enacted in relation to immigration, deportations. We have dismantling of DEI initiatives, which is just really disappointing, and uncertainty around federal jobs that can impact our USDA leadership and the people that we interface with in our regional offices. And then who knows what's going on with the Department of Education, but that is just like, it's a lot. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I know that there's, you know, we do live in a democratic country. So part of that democratic process is to raise our voices, right? And so we did want to share one action alert in relation to the proposal in the House Ways and Means Committee. So if you can take a moment to fill that out if you haven't already. That is just one action alert. If you are from an advocacy organization and there's anything else that you would like to share, or if you're on any of the boards or participating in any of the different advocacy groups, please feel free to share in the chat other ways that we can all, you know, stay in tune with what's going on and do our part to speak up for the issues that are near and dear to our hearts. So, you know, the resilience of our community is one thing that inspires me on a daily basis. And I know that that's something that I just want to acknowledge, that we've been through really hard things in the past. And I really, truly believe in this community and our power to come together and support one another.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for grounding us with those words, Jen. I could not agree with you more, especially about the resilience of this community. It's always inspired me. Speaking of resilience, we're still thinking about all of our friends and the communities that are impacted by recent fires in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Is there anything you'd like to share, any relevant resources that California schools in particular should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. Our hearts have been with LA, and those impacted by the fires. We have up here on the screen some of the resources. Many of the schools impacted already are aware of this, and we've sent a lot of this out in our newsletter, but we just wanted to reiterate here that the schools that were closed due to the fires in California in particular, there's this disaster meal application that you can complete to get additional funds to help offset the costs of the school closure. So make sure you're filling that out. And then in relation to this, in this particular disaster and other disasters, I did want to point out something that maybe not everyone noticed. There is some flexibility, I guess, or it's really just the standard process for any disaster if your school community is evacuated. I want everyone to be aware that children from evacuated areas may be determined as homeless, right? So think about if that relates to your school, and also keep that in mind in case you were impacted by another disaster earlier this school year, or if this happens with, increasing severe weather events. This may be something that occurs in your community, God forbid, in future. If your community is evacuated, or if it was during the fires, then the students from those areas can be determined as homeless. That goes to your local homeless liaison. They're really the expert in, figuring that all out. But if your homeless liaison in your district is able to provide you with a list that says these were the folks who were evacuated, we've confirmed that they were temporarily homeless, then if they were homeless on that one day, then they were homeless for the whole year. Where that really can have a bigger impact on your program is that if you utilize that homeless designation on your April 1st snapshot for CEP. So it may be wise for schools that were in the evacuation zones to rebase or apply for the first time for CEP, because you'll pull your school year 24-25 data, which will include homeless data as of April 1st, which is for anyone who was homeless in this year. And then that can help your school have a higher ISP for the next 4 years.
Okay, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, and we'll get into CEP a little bit more as well in a future lunch break call in April, I believe. So it's
Yeah.
really good to see all the breadth of these resources, though. But now I'd like to transition us to talk a little bit more about compliance, and to help keep folks on track this month. We actually have a handy checklist that we release at the beginning of every month, which goes out in our weekly newsletter and is publicly available to download for free. But for today's call, I'd like to pull out a few things that folks most importantly need to know right now. So, Jen, what do we need to do this month to stay on track?
Yeah, definitely. Our monthly checklist is a great resource if you haven't been utilizing it. It's a free resource we do every month. And I won't be too repetitive with what's already on the checklist, but you can download that in the chat and take a peek. There's just a couple of things I wanted to pluck out, and starting with one California specific reminder, just because it is February right now. And if you are a school district in California that received the KIT funding, then remember that deadline is coming up June 30th. So we want to make sure that we're spending or encumbering those funds by June 30th. Otherwise, it's kind of like a use it or lose it, right? So encumber, what does that mean? I'd be the first one to raise my hand and say I didn't really know what that meant. I had to get that definition from CDE. So either spend your funds by June 30th, or for this particular funding stream, you could encumber the funds, which CDE is defining as having a contract in place or a purchase order. So let's say you have a construction project, it's going on, it's not going to be finished by June 30th. You're not going to be able to write that check by June 30th. You can have that contract in place to show, oh, we've got, $500,000 allocated in this contract to spend, and that is sufficient. It doesn't have to have that money already being gone. It could be contracted, or you could have a PO. Let's say you're going around to all your sites right now, you're trying to spend the rest of the money, you're getting lists of smallwares and ovens and things like that that you need for your kitchens. Then those, you could put that PO in with the restaurant supply to get those products, even if they're not going to get delivered until September, because everyone's doing the same thing and they're back ordered. So make sure you've got your contract or your PO set up. And then the other thing I want to mention is, if you did get that freshly prepared on-site meals money for scratch cooking, make sure that you are working on that. CDE hasn't been talking about it too much in the last month or two. I don't know exactly how or if that's going to be monitored, but I want everyone who did get that money to feel confident. If you need to attest that you're meeting the standards, that you feel like you can attest that you've met the 40% scratch cooking. So keep that in mind. And then really exciting news. So we have 4 things you need to know. The 4th thing is, lucky last, is that the governor's January budget proposed an additional $150 million for the KIT 25. So really cool. Thank you so much for all the people who've been advocating and working in Sacramento to help make this happen. It is just proposed, and we talked about the LA fires a minute ago. We don't know, this was proposed and put in the budget before the fires, so we don't know that this is it's definitely not a guarantee, but it is very encouraging. Anything that you can do to help advocate for this as well, sticking in the budget will be a really good thing. And we'll know more when we get the May revise and then the final budget in June.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you should be knowing?
Yeah, so a couple other things I wanted to pluck out. So the Ramadan waiver, this I actually thought was just a California state specific waiver, but in preparing for today, I realized there's several states that have opted in. So this is a USDA waiver that states can opt into. So not every state has opted in, but California and maybe a handful of other states, Washington, Arizona, Massachusetts, have opted into the USDA waiver for having non-congregate kind of basically grab and go meals during Ramadan, specifically for the students who are observing Ramadan. So check with your state agency if that's something that you'd like to participate in and you're able to participate in. We also just added to the pro membership a program integrity plan because I know in California they want to show like a program integrity plan to prevent duplicate meals during non-congregate meal service. So that's a template that we've kind of refreshed from COVID and put into the resource library on LunchAssist Pro. Two other things that we'll talk about in relation to kind of staying on track this month. First, procurement. That's kind of going to be a little bit of a through line. That's going to ground a bit more of our conversation when we talk about Buy American and updates to the meal pattern, because it's February, which means a lot of people are thinking about bids and procurement for next year because it does take a little bit of time, or maybe you're thinking about procurement on like the things you need to buy for your kit funds. So we'll talk a little bit about what you can be doing for procurement. And then last but not least, on-site monitoring. So when it comes to February, as a director, I always used to think like, okay, I'm done with my site monitoring. I just did my NSLP and school breakfast site monitoring. But yes, that might be done, but there's a whole bunch of other site monitoring depending on which program you operate. So I did just want to take a moment. I thought this was a good moment to kind of talk about site monitoring and all the different types of site monitoring requirements, just so that you don't have one slip off your radar.
Okay, yeah, please tell us more about on-site monitoring. There are so many different programs to keep track of. So what is the difference between all these different programs site monitoring?
Yeah, definitely. There is like a whole bunch of different requirements. And this is like literally like one reason I have a job is because they're all same, but different, and like all these little nuances. So bless all the food service directors and supervisors and assistant directors who are keeping track of this, because it is a lot. So NSLP is really straightforward. You monitor each site by basically by January 31st, because it has to be done before February 1st. So hopefully you can do a big green check, you've done that, right? If not, just go ahead and make sure you get it done even though it's late. School breakfast program, it's the same, but you only have to monitor half of your sites each school year. Over the course of 2 years, you have to monitor all of them. So if you do half this year, you do east side this year, west side next year. You need to make sure over the course of 2 years, you've gone to all your sites. So if you haven't kind of mapped that all out, make sure you're not missing someone and you don't have a school that you haven't monitored at breakfast for 3 years, for example. CACFP, you can see here on the screen, very nuanced. To comply with all these little bullet points you see under CACFP, we usually say do one monitoring in the fall, one kind of this time of year, February, and then another monitoring in May. So 3 times a year. And then if you don't have CACFP, maybe you have NSLP after school snacks, you have to do one of those within the first 4 weeks of school, and then another one before the end of the school year. So that may be, if you've done your NSLP and school breakfast, chances are you still, before the end of the year, need to get your CACFP or your snack, if you operate those programs, completed. And then just when you think you're done, you have summer site monitoring. So nothing we can do on that right now, but just clicking that on your radar. Don't forget this summer, if you're operating one of the summer programs, here's your site monitoring requirements. We're going to send all these slides out so you can reference this later. So no worries there. But yeah, just wanted to kind of put a bug in your ear about site monitoring, because yeah, it's kind of timely for February, and hopefully part of it's done, but part of it is probably still lingering there in the background.
Oh yeah, well, thank you for explaining all of that. The chart mapping out different program requirements is really helpful to see, which is a good reminder that the monthly checklist we have has quite a few details and resources that folks can utilize. So now I think I'm finally ready to get into our deep dive topic today. Let's move into talking about what people need to know about the Buy American provision. In April of last year, the USDA announced a new final rule which updated school nutrition requirements based on the goals of the 2020-2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. The final rule technically went into effect July 1st of last year, but the restrictive changes are not required until July 1st of this year. And many of the meal pattern restrictions will be slowly phased in between now and 2031. But so the final rule touched on a lot of things. It changed nutrition requirements and the meal pattern. It created new menu planning flexibilities and updated quite a few policies related to program operations. And one of those items that the final rule touched on was the Buy American provision. But before we get into the updates, what is the Buy American provision and how do we stay in compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the Buy American provision. So, I actually, literally until yesterday, I always thought that the Buy American provision had always been in place. And maybe it had in some ways, but like based on my research, it's really something that got like solidified in this child nutrition reauthorization of 1998. So if anyone else has more history, just for all of us like school lunch nerds, feel free to put that in the chat. I'm very curious, like what you know about the Buy American provision and where it came from and how long it's been around. I always thought it was from the very beginning of the program, but I think it was really at least codified in the 1998 and 2002 kind of policy changes to our programs. And then, what you can see here on the screen is essentially how it works right now. So we need to meet this procurement standard essentially when purchasing food. It doesn't apply to supplies or equipment. Of course, that's not all domestically sourced. But when purchasing food, we need to purchase domestic food as much as possible, and there's only limited exceptions, right? And it's only if the food is not produced in sufficient quantity, that could be ever, or it could be seasonally, or if we went to bid and the food is significantly more expensive. And USDA doesn't define significantly, but states have different requirements. So in California, it's that significantly more expensive is actually defined as 25% more expensive.
Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward. Been around for a while. What are the recent updates that have been made to the Buy American provision?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, and actually before I mention that, I want to say this, if you can see here on the screen, we at Lunch Assist, we always like to think about like, okay, yeah, that's the rule, but how is it audited? Like, what's the state going to hold me to, right? Like, we're just a bunch of former directors and former auditors. So how is this audited? So in this current school year, essentially what you see here on the screen is how Buy American is audited and monitored by the state. So you get during your AR, the reviewer comes around, observes your storeroom, looks in your fridge and freezer, and basically tries to find things that are non-domestic. And then if they basically need to see that you have like a piece of paper on file to say, yes, this is an approved exception. I am aware that those cherry tomatoes are from another country. This is a seasonal exception. You have this form on file. And then you also need to have Buy American language in your solicitations and RFPs. So these are the things that essentially need to be happening right now, but then there's some changes coming into play as well. So you asked like, what are the recent updates? So essentially there's a little tiny update that went into effect this year, which actually gives us a little bit more flexibility. So those forms I just was talking about, like we need to have forms on file to say, yes, this is an approved exception. There's actually a little bit of flexibility around things that are on the FAR list. So we're going to put the link to the FAR list for really big Buy American nerds to look through. So if something's on this exception list, like bananas, for example, we don't actually need to have a form. So it kind of is a little bit of an alleviation of paperwork because we don't need to have that piece of paper, that exception form on file for bananas. So that's a little bit easier this year. But then next year, things are actually going to get a little bit more difficult. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because I wanted to give everyone a heads up for something that's coming into effect next year, which may be very cumbersome.
Yeah, because right now it seems pretty straightforward. I mean, there's things that folks can put into place right now, but going forward, what needs to be done in school year 25-26 to stay compliant?
Yeah, so 25-26, essentially there's a new thing coming into effect, which is about essentially tracking of expenses and tracking of like every dollar spent on domestic versus non-domestic foods. And this is the first time we've ever had to do this in our programs. And that's why it's such a big deal. And I wanted to mention it today, because essentially the rule is that USDA is placing a limit on non-domestic food purchases. It's no more than 10% in 25-26, and then between now and 2031, it's going to go all the way down to 5%. Honestly, 5%, 10%, who cares? Like most people are in compliance with both of those. Like it's not like we buy that many bananas, right? But essentially the cumbersome part is how do you actually track that? A lot of times we don't even like have that country of origin itemized on our ordering system, right? You're just ordering tomatoes, and on Monday they're from California and on Tuesday they're coming across the border. So what we need to be thinking about right now, and what a lot of our clients are doing, is picking up the phone, having these conversations with your current vendors to say, hey, what kind of velocity report can you give me? In an ideal world, you could just track this once at the end of the year, and you could get a report that said, okay, all of these foods, this is the country of origin. They were from, this is how much you spent. All of these foods, here's the country of origin. This is how much you spent. And then you can say, cool, I spent 20,000 on non-domestic. I spent 7 million on domestic. I'm good. I'm well under the cap. But right now it's just about data. So I think we want to basically be looking at what do our vendors have available to us right now? Vendors, what can you do? What kind of data and systems can you put in place? Do you have the same code for domestic or non-domestic? Or if we order cherry tomatoes, does it flick to a different code so that it can show it as a different line item on a velocity report, for example? So thinking about the data that's available to us, and potentially as we think about procurement for next year, putting some language around what data you need for your program into your bids and RFPs as a requirement so that you can get access to this and you feasibly can track this without having to track down every single cardboard box and looking at that's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, well, that's really important nonetheless. So, but updates, to the Buy American provision weren't the only thing that changed as a result of last year's final rule. There were a lot of changes to the meal pattern requirements. It's already February 2025, and as you mentioned, people are already starting to think about procurement for next school year. So as people start to plan for upcoming RFPs or bids, can you remind us what are the updates to the meal pattern requirements and how might folks need to consider these when going out to bid for next year?
Yeah, definitely. What is all that American food that you need to be buying
Exactly.
specifically? Yeah. Um, so we've probably all seen this graphic here. This is that implementation timeline. So essentially, like you were saying, the flexibilities went into place already, some of them that you can utilize, you don't have to, they're flexibilities, right? And then there are a couple things that are more stringent requirements that are going into effect in the fall. So again, that's why we wanted to mention it right now, is just to put like a little alert out there for some things that might be changing that you need to be putting into your bids and procurements and like if you're working on next year menus, like don't forget, like this is changing. So real quick, I'll just run through very quickly the things that already went into effect. Just in case you aren't using these flexibilities, remember that you can utilize the combined grains and meat alternate meal component at breakfast. So that's been combined, that already went into effect. You can use it, you don't have to, but something to keep in mind. You also can substitute vegetables for fruit in the school breakfast program. There's some nuance to that, so feel free to read this slide, circle back to it later, but that's a flexibility that's already in effect. Nuts and seeds now credit for the full meat alternate component, so that's really cool. Like that's especially if you have some vegan meals that you don't have to try to, yeah, you can use nuts and seeds as a full meal component. And then vegetables can be served in lieu of grains in certain communities. So that's an additional flexibility that went into effect. So those are what's in effect so far. The things that are changing that, again, may impact your menu planning for next year. So keep in mind, these are kind of coming on your radar. So the first one is added sugars and the first phase of product-based limits. Now, this is like kind of like just easing into the added sugar requirements because I think for most folks, this is going to be pretty easy. I think the only thing that's going to be a little difficult, or not difficult, but just think you just make sure you kind of like double check what's on your menus is the breakfast cereals. So some folks are going to have to change breakfast cereals because there are a lot of breakfast cereals in schools, especially like at high schools and stuff that have over 6 grams of added sugar per dry ounce. A lot of manufacturers are reformulating. So thank you to all of our vendors and manufacturers for your partnership and helping, reduce that sugar in the food supply. But just take a look at what's on your menus for next year, what's on your bid, make sure it's complying with that. And then what's a little bit bigger change for those of you who operate NSLP snacks. So this is just NSLP snacks. If you do have this, remember that then it's essentially a new meal pattern for NSLP snacks. So the biggest change is the no grain-based desserts. So NSLP snacks is now aligned starting in July, basically, with the CACFP meal pattern. So the biggest change that I kind of see when I look at my clients' menus is the grain-based desserts because there's a lot of granola bars, cookies, things like that, like on NSLP snack menus. So think about if you need to procure those goods for next year or if you need to remove them and swap out menu items for your NSLP snack items. And then this is the food buying guide and like that USDA website, which has all of the meal pattern information that's been updated. So we'll put a link to this PDF in the chat. So this is the new meal pattern. You can kind of see all the footnotes and everything if you're needing to update your NSLP snack meal pattern.
Yeah, and that reminds me, the USDA FNS is actually requesting input and comments to inform, future guidance, technical assistance related to grain-based desserts and high-protein yogurt crediting in child nutrition programs. So if folks want to comment on that, those are accepted through March 26th, and we can also put the link in the chat to that resource. So, it sounds like the things that we really need to be aware of with the meal pattern requirements going into next year are changes to NSLP after school snacks and the added sugar requirements. But did the final rule change anything else that impacts procurement going into next year?
Yeah, so again, with working on our bids and procurements, and I see Jacqueline Day here from CDFA. Hello, welcome. You'll be some of the people really excited about this change, which is just remember that you can specify local now. So if you're working on bids and procurement, keep that front and center, top of mind if you would like to use locally grown raised or caught as a product specification for minimally processed foods. So you can use your own definition of local. And then when you're writing your specifications, keep in mind that for minimally processed foods, a locally grown product, so if you say local oranges, is a different product than non-local oranges. and you can actually throw out a bid if it responds. You specify local and it's not local, it's a different product, right? So that, and then you can also get pricing for them if you want to specify both, because maybe there's seasonal availability differences. You can have line items that are different: local orange line item, non-local orange line item. So that's some of the ways that you can navigate this, and use it to get more local foods into schools, which is something near and dear to my heart. And you have a list here, of the unprocessed or minimally processed foods that, we can specify local for. So it's not everything. Just to point out, unfortunately, you can't do that for tortillas, for example, or bread. So I know a lot of people love working with local bakeries and tortillerias. That is not a minimally processed food. So you would need to use other mechanisms within the procurement process to source. You can still source local, you just can't specify local for products that aren't minimally processed. But these things that under the included column, those are the things that we can specify local for. And of course, reach out to CDFA and our farm to school friends, if you would like more support on farm to school programs.
Yeah, and that's great. So keeping in mind all of these changes, what can schools do right now to prepare for school year 25-26 procurement and going out to bid?
Okay, so putting pen to paper, and this is the last thing we're going to cover today. And essentially, this is like what I would be doing in February. This is a lot of what we're doing with clients. I see some of our clients on the call, so you're probably working on this with your consultant if you're not in the middle of an audit. So essentially, kind of the process that I like to go through, and that our consultants sort of guide our clients through, is the first thing is pull, like, so you're planning about like what you're going to do for your bids next year. One of the ways to go about this is pull a vendor paid list. Like, go to your fiscal system, pull out who am I paying this year? Who are all my people that I'm paying, my vendors? Because sometimes we think, oh yeah, we need to do like our milk, our produce, our grocery. But then when you pull your vendor paid list, you might be like, oh wow, I'm actually paying, this maintenance contract. I've got this other thing for towels. So there's a lot of things that go into procurement, not just like food. There's also supplies, equipment, things like that. So pull that big list. And then we have a procurement planning worksheet that a lot of you probably already utilize. And this is something that you can just start to get organized. So you can say, and it really mirrors what you do during a procurement review. So it's a great kind of practice run so that you're in compliance with those regulations come review time. But you just kind of think about, okay, who are my vendors? What am I paying? What method of procurement? And then you can see, am I getting close to thresholds? Do I need to do a more formalized process? Do I need to make sure I get quotes? And it'll sort of help you get your wheels turning so that you can really determine what procurement processes need to be completed. And it's February right now, so it just kind of gets your wheels turning so that you know, like, okay, over the next couple months ahead of school year 25-26, what do I need to be doing so that I'm in compliance with my procurement processes? And then you can kind of start working on drafting up bid language, outlining like, okay, what RFPs do I need to do, if any? Do I have some renewals? Can I roll over something? Is there someone I can piggyback off of? And then make sure to tune in next month, because we're going to do a bit deeper dive into that. But I think these are some of the things I would recommend doing in February. Like, even if you just carve out an afternoon to kind of turn on your procurement brain a little bit and think through it. I think that it's just about getting those wheels in motion.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. Thank you so much. But actually, those are all the questions I had for you today, Jen. Now, before we get into our Q&A session, I just want to finish with a few reminders in terms of accessing the resources that are mentioned during this call. Everything will be shared in a follow-up email, including a link to the recording. For LunchAssist Pro members, this webinar and all of the corresponding resources will be uploaded directly into your Pro account as a training video. And as Jen mentioned, next month, it will be Thursday, March 6th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Our deep dive topic will be bids and procurement for school year 25-26. And speaking of procurement, we actually have a pretty incredible 3-part procurement video series that's coming soon to Pro, which will be officially online next month. And I just want to remind everyone that membership with LunchAssist Pro and access to the training library, AR Bootcamp, and consulting services are a great use of your kit funds, especially if you need to make use of those funds before June. And of course, membership can always be purchased with your cafeteria funds. Thank you again to all of our members and customers that really are supporting us to make this happen and possible. So if you aren't a member, schedule a call with Mike to learn more. He'll walk you through it. I'll put his email in the chat. It's mike@lunchassist.org. And if you have any questions for us today, please pop them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go.